Hey, it's Sarah with Loaves and Dishes, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this super delicious lemon ginger squash cake. Before we get into the video, be sure to subscribe so that you'll be notified when we upload. So I received a ton of squash from my father-in-law, who has a garden, and I got more this weekend too. And I was trying to figure out what to do with it, and I thought, people make zucchini bread. Why couldn't I make a squash bread? Or in this case, it's more of a cake. So here's what I did. I peeled the squash because squash to me has a waxier coating than zucchini does. So I just wanted to get rid of the waxiness. So I peeled it really quickly. I think that could be optional if you didn't want to do that. But I would recommend doing it. I think it would help the squash kind of like melt into the cake better. And then I'm scooping out the seeds. If your squash doesn't have a ton of seeds, you could probably skip this step, but I've never seen a squash without a million seeds, so I scooped out the seeds. But again, if you wanted the benefit, I guess, maybe the extra fiber from the seeds, you could leave it in. But I decided to scoop it out, and I would recommend scooping it out. So then I am grating the squash. You only need about a cup. I think I got a little bit more than a cup, and that was just one kind of like medium-sized squash. So if you have a small squash, maybe you need to use two. It just depends. Or if you wanted a little less squash in your cake, you could use a little less. That part is not, it's not important really to the recipe. Like if you used an extra cup of flour, that would be kind of detrimental. This part doesn't really matter that much. The important part though is that you do want to dry your squash. So I just rolled it up in a paper towel and I set it on the counter while I did the rest of this. So I've got 1 stick of room temperature butter, 2 cups of sugar, and I'm going to cream those together. And then I'm going to add the juice of a lemon and the zest of 1 lemon. And that's about a 1/4 cup of juice. It's about a tablespoon of zest. Now my secret trick when I make cakes in my KitchenAid especially is after each step I give it a mix and then I scrape down the entire bowl and the paddle. And I like to use the paddle more than I like to use the whisk. So I just added some vanilla extract and I'm adding some sour cream. My other trick is I added a heaping 1/2 cup of sour cream. So I kind of mounded the top. It was 1 8-ounce container of sour cream. I used the whole thing. So I added some milk. I'm adding some eggs. And you could replace the sour cream with Greek yogurt if you wanted to, but I think sour cream is better personally. And now I'm adding 2 cups of flour and some baking powder and a pinch of salt. And I do a lot of mixing before I add the flour because once you add the flour, you don't want to mix it too much. Otherwise, you'll overwork the gluten in the flour and it will be gross. It won't taste as good. So once the flour is in, I'm just mixing that up so that it's like really incorporated. And I'm, going to scrape everything down. I want to make sure I get all of the flour and everything off the bottom. It makes everything a little bit more time consuming and you have an extra dish to clean with the spatula. But this is a trick that I learned from a professional chef and it really makes a difference, I think. So then I added the squash and I'm just going to quickly mix that in just so that it's mixed thoroughly. And then I'm going to grease and oil my loaf pan. Grease and flour my loaf pan. If you want your cakes to come out every time, you want to grease them and flour them. So I sprayed the grease in, put in a little flour, shook it around so it got all over the edge, and then I tapped it really hard on the counter and dumped the excess flour, whatever wasn't sticking to grease, to the oil in the trash. And your cake will come out perfect every time. And you'll see where you're missing oil because it won't stick to the pan. So I'm just pouring the batter in, spreading that around, and I cut this out, but the other thing that I do is I tap my loaf pan on the counter a couple times just to get rid of any air bubbles and to settle it. I'm going to bake it at 350 for 60 minutes. So while it's baking, I made a glaze to go on top, and this is just a really thin icing. So I did some powdered sugar, I'm doing some lemon juice, and I'm going to add some ginger. You don't have to add the ginger if you just want lemon pound cake taste, but the ginger gives it something a little extra oomph. I added a little bit of milk, and I am just mixing that up. If you wanted it thicker, you would want to add less milk, more powdered sugar. If you wanted it thinner, you'd want to add a little more milk. I wouldn't go less powdered sugar because you can't go wrong with more powdered sugar. So I just made this glaze, and then I set it aside and waited for the cake to come out of the oven. And you want to make sure it's mixed up really well. And if you want like perfect, I would recommend sifting the flour and also sifting the powdered sugar. And there won't be any lumps at all. So once the cake had cooled off enough to kind of touch it, it was still pretty warm. I pulled it out of the pan and I put it on my cake plate. And then I just poured the glaze right on top. I probably could have been a little bit neater about this because a lot of glaze like came off and ended up sticking to the bottom of my cake plate, but that didn't matter. Goose was in the background of this video and I thought that was too cute, so I had to leave it in. But that's it. This was super delicious and I hope you enjoy it. If you want to see more recipes, be sure to check out Loaves and Dishes, and thanks for watching.